Greetings and salutations. I wanted to talk with you a little bit about the writing process. So when we think about writing, a lot of times our focus is on the product, the end product, that final draft that you turn into your instructor. But it's really important to think about the way that you get there. So you want to focus on the process because that can help you lead you to a better product, to have a better essay. Sometimes we rush towards that end product. So something to think about, I move my talking head, is that there are a series of repeatable steps. You can go to those steps more than once. So the first one is pre-writing. And that's anything you do ahead of time. And we'll talk about each of these steps more in depth. Anything you do before you really start writing, even if you're just drinking coffee and thinking about your essay. Then you have writing, or what a lot of people will call drafting, where you're creating your earliest draft, right? Then you go on to the stage where you think about revising, and that's really looking at big picture issues. Like, is this addressing my purpose and audience? Is it meeting the assignment guidelines? Is it doing what I want it to do overall? Then you get into editing and proofreading, which are similar but can be distinguished. But they're dealing more with things on the sentence level and formatting and citation and typos and grammar errors and spelling issues and punctuation and that kind of thing. And then publishing, which could be literally publishing your work, right, by putting it online, or it could be publishing your work by turning it into your instructor, and so on. Okay. So we've addressed each of these, but I want to go a little bit in more detail. The purpose of pre-writing is to generate ideas for your essay. It's to organize and connect those ideas, and I think that this also counts is gathering evidence, right? So if you're doing research, or if you're writing something about a book that you read, finding quotations or passages that you think are significant would be important for this. Some examples of pre-writing are brainstorming. That's like when you write just ideas down in a list and no particular order. Clustering, or mind mapping, where you have a central idea and you kind of branch off into other ideas. Free writing is this has been for a long time one of my favorites, where you just put on a timer and you write about the topic for 10 minutes, and you don't worry about grammar, you don't worry about going off topic, you just bring yourself back onto the topic, and you kind of shut off the judge and just write. And then you stop. And then looping is where you take the free writing that you've done, you go through with maybe like a highlighter or something, and you pick out ideas that seem more promising, because there's going to be some muck in there, and you do another free write for another 10 minutes or so, where you're using the ideas that came up the first time, but you're delving in a little bit more deeply. And so you could loop as many times as you want to. I think that research and reading notes are also a form of pre-writing, because you're getting yourself ready to write. And then the last, and this took me a long time, I did not love outlining as a freshman in college. I learned to love outlining as I did longer projects that were more complicated. And then I realized, oh, outlining really helps me stay focused. It helps me make sure I don't lose track of the larger picture. Outlining can also be something you do between drafts, though it's often, English teachers and other teachers often ask for it beforehand, because they want you to think about the organization ahead of time. But I just want you to know, if you don't love outlining yet, give yourself time. I think some of these methods, they take time, first of all, to learn how to do, and to learn when they're most useful to you. Okay, but pre-writing is one of those things where you can revisit it. Maybe you get stuck at some point of your paper, you can go back to some of that, right? And do some of that again later. Now, drafting or writing those first couple drafts, you want to start off by rereading the guidelines, and then you want to get your ideas on paper. You just want to write. You want to be quick about it. You don't want to spend a long time trying to make it phrased perfectly. And so focus on completion over perfection. Get the ideas on paper. And then the other thing that I would really recommend is that you keep the essential questions and the thesis in mind. when you're revising, I also encourage you to reread the guidelines one more time, because it's so easy to forget what the assignment's all about. And so focus on big picture issues. Does the essay answer the essential questions? Are there any assignment requirements that have not been met? Maybe it's not long enough. Maybe there was some piece of information you were supposed to include, or some idea you were supposed to connect to. And so it's okay if on the first draft you didn't do that, but in revising, you want to kind of go, okay, what's going on? Now for my class, I started adding a checklist. So I would go through the checklist while you're revising. And then you really want to think about big picture issues like, how can the organization and coherence be improved? Am I transitioning between ideas in a way that's smooth and logical? Could I rearrange my ideas to be more effective? Could the reasoning and the evidence be strengthened anywhere? Would my reader find this clear and convincing? Would my reader find this engaging? I didn't have this in the list, but do I go off topic at all? It's easy sometimes on a first draft to go off topic. So you have to go, after you've reread the guidelines, you can go, oh no, I started talking about this, but I don't think that's on topic. Okay, so revising is looking at those big picture issues. Once you feel like the big picture issues have been addressed, that's where you can start focusing more on the sentence level. And I find too many people get really hung up on this early in the process, and so they don't finish a draft, or they just skip the step entirely, and so what they give me is essentially a rough draft. And so you want to focus on sentence level issues eventually. It's important. It's like combing your hair and brushing your teeth and wearing clean clothes to a job interview. You want them to focus on your ideas, not on the piece of, spinach stuck in your teeth, right? So look for errors in grammar, spelling, and punctuation. Do that at the end. Look for typos, right? Where it's like your finger slipped, right? Or maybe autocorrect, misunderstood what word you were trying to write. And, I had a great essay that a student wrote once about being in the Marine Corps and somebody attempting suicide. And he said that this person was standing in a poodle of blood. And I mean, he had me, I was so with the student. It was such a gripping paper. But when I read poodle of blood, I started laughing. It took me out of the paper. It took me off focus where my focus should have been. So, poodle of blood was clearly an autocorrect issue. It wasn't that he didn't know how to spell the word pool, right? And then check the formatting, right? Are the margins the way they're supposed to be? Is the spacing there? Is the indentation of the paragraphs, right? It's about professionalism, about respecting your writing enough to present it in a professional way. And so it doesn't need to look fancy or cute. It needs to look professional. So you're going to use MLA format. You also need to check your MLA citations. Make sure there's no accidental plagiarism. Make sure every time you use a source, you're citing it. Make sure your works cited list connects to your in-text citations, and so on. And then some strategies for doing this is reading aloud. Sometimes we catch things. And by the way, I didn't say this on here, but take 24 hours. Write your rough draft. Do the editing and proofreading 24 hours later. Give yourself a little space and it'll be fresher to you. Reading aloud also makes it fresher to you, or ask somebody else to read aloud to you. If they stumble over something, that might be something that needs to be fixed. Another thing that works really well is reading backwards, one sentence at a time. You start at the end and go back, and then search once for each of your top 3 grammar targets. If you know you struggle with run-ons, take at least one time where you're only looking for run-ons and nothing else. If it's commas, do a look through where you're only looking for commas and nothing else, and so on. And then publishing, really for school, typically means submitting it to your teacher or anywhere else public, right? Peer review can be a form of pre-publishing in a sense. You should try to make your essays as strong as you know how to make them before the peer review, or else they're going to tell you stuff you already know. You want it to be as good as you know how to make it. And then when you do a peer review, or they'll give you some ideas about how to make it even better so you can level up again. So consider what steps can and should be repeated, right? If maybe your introduction was weak, or maybe your introduction was kind of directed the reader in a direction you didn't end up going, You might need to pre-write a little bit and generate, like brainstorm some new ideas about how to do an intro. You might need to draft a new introduction and then revise it and edit it and so on. So you can repeat any of these steps in the writing process, and your first draft should look remarkably different from your final draft. And you may have multiple drafts in between. Thank you so much.